What is a strategy game? Sounds like a stupid question at first glance. But think about this. Surely every game must contain strategy to some extent. As much as we may like to denigrate the IQ of modern warfare players, you can't deny that they do put a lot of thought into their play. So, should COD be classified as a strategy game, then? More importantly, finding the common thread that underlies all strategy games, real-time, tactics-based, turn-based, could aid us immensely when considering what ought to be the overarching goals of the genre. And with that, I now pose the question once more. What is a strategy game? Let's start with Wikipedia, as any self-respecting college student does. Strategy: a high-level plan to achieve one or more goals under conditions of uncertainty, about attaining and maintaining a position of advantage over adversaries through the successive exploitation of known or emergent possibilities, rather than committing to any specific fixed plan designed at the outset. Strategy game: a game where the player's uncoerced, often autonomous decision-making skills have high significance in determining the outcome. Requires internal decision tree-style making, typically very high situational awareness. Strategy video game: emphasizes skillful thinking and planning to achieve victory. Emphasizes strategic, tactical, and sometimes logistical challenges. Many games also offer economic challenges and exploration. Now, in my opinion, these do quite a good job of describing what the features of strategy games are. However, this is not enough. None of these definitions, focusing on external appearances, really exclude COD or most other games, for that matter, from being considered strategy games. These kinds of definitions also risk giving us a prescriptive view of strategy games, thinking that all games in this genre have to have these features, when there could be future or present-day games that don't. What we need is an in-depth analysis into the spirit of what makes a game strategic. And to do that, we must examine what real-life strategists mean or meant when they talked about strategy. Clausewitz is regarded as the person to turn to on matters of strategy. In his magnum opus, On War, he writes thus: "No one starts a war, or rather, no one in his senses ought to do so, without first being clear in his mind what he intends to achieve by that war, and how he intends to conduct it." Jermy, discussing this quote, argues that strategy is there to answer the how, and I agree with them on this point, as far as strategic gaming is concerned. Strategy helps us achieve ultimate goals, not set them. To butcher Clausewitz's quote, the what question has already been answered by the time we start a game. Nobody enters a StarCraft game without having a sense, at least, of where they want to be at the end of said game. Usually, they want to win. Sometimes they want to roleplay. Couple of occasions, they may want to test out a new tactic. The argument still stands. Strategy is, first and foremost, a means, not an end. Strategy games, therefore, are about players' means setting, not end setting. This first point means very little in gaming terms, for I would argue that there are no games where the player engages only in end setting. Philosophy engages in end setting. Games do not. And before you ask, moral choice systems can't end set, partly because A, moral choice systems, by themselves, can never be the sole bread and butter of a game, and B, by giving rewards for moral choices, contemporary games reduce such systems back into means. All games have implied or revealed ends that you, as a player, know you want to achieve even before you play the game. So we need to delve deeper into the meaning of strategy. Jermy, following his discussion of Clausewitz, postulates 3 directions or roles of strategy, which I think yield fruitful results for our discussion. They are: 1. Little Heart's definition, amended by Jermy: the art of distributing and applying means to fulfill the end of policy. 2. Strategy as a deliberate clash of wills, both in a political and physical sense. 3. Strategy as a key means of commanding and directing the instruments of power. As we have discussed earlier, strategy is about finding the means to assist in achieving preset ends. And such preset ends in gaming include things such as don't lose, roleplay, test new tactic, etc. So what does this imply in practice? It implies that strategy gaming, ultimately, is about process. It's about grasping the mechanisms that the developer has created over the course of making the game, and manipulating them to obtain the best means to achieve your own ends. Let's have an example. Suppose you want to win a peaceful cultural victory in Civilization IV. To do that, you need to maximize cultural output. And to do that, you need to examine your civilization's strengths, available placement areas, civics options, tech level, and so on, and then formulate a plan detailing the necessary actions needed to maximize culture. You can see that it gets complicated real quick, but at its core, strategy games are ultimately about process. To put it crudely, they are also about numbers. This differentiates strategy games from games where storytelling is the central concept, or games that have some alternative niche goal, for example, an educational game. Perhaps the best illustration of this aspect of strategy, that there must be an opposing intelligence in strategy, can be seen in Luttwak's idea of strategy having a paradoxical logic. Consider such advice as, if you want to lose weight, eat more. Such advice would be, justifiably, ridiculous. But consider these well-known proverbs on war. 1. If you want peace, prepare for war. 2. Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. 3. He who fears being conquered is certain of defeat. These statements are no less paradoxical, yet seem so much more natural to the extent that they relate to the process of strategy. Why is that so? Luttwak explains that this is because the opponent in strategy is not passive, but active. Rather than merely reacting, your opponent can respond, anticipate, and deduce your actions, and plan his moves with that in mind. As such, in strategy, what seems to be the easy route at first glance may not turn out to be so easy after all, precisely because there is an intelligence that is anticipating your choices, with a view to frustrating them. A strategy game, theoretically, necessitates a different style of thinking compared with the thinking that you could do in, say, Portal or Tetris. With an opponent that is out to frustrate the player's moves, we can no longer predict outcomes based on natural or physical laws that stipulate specific reactions to certain actions. The future, in a strategy game, is always uncertain. Now this opponent could be AI or human, peaceful or aggressive. Hell, it doesn't have to be labeled as an opponent at all, but it has to exist. Of course, can we, in good faith, say that we cannot predict how an AI reacts in a strategy game? Of course not. But I think it is fair to say that strategy games, in order for them to actually contain strategy, must possess this axiom in spirit, at the very least. I admit that outside of Jermy, I haven't read anybody else who has detailed such a role for strategy. I suspect, however, that this fact is implied by most strategic thinkers. Strategy is as much about human resources as it is about outwitting the enemy. As mentioned earlier, strategy is about applying the correct means to achieve our ends. In practical terms, this means marshalling our resources in the best way possible, or at the very least, marshalling them in a way that puts us above our enemy. Inevitably, this cannot be a one-man job. To have a good strategy, we must not only think of a good plan, but we also have to execute this plan on the level of our resource gatherers, our soldiers, our researchers, etc. This also means that there are clear power differentials in strategy games. There are people who play the role of leaders, and there are people, usually AI bots, who play the role of followers. Oftentimes the player is the leader, but there are games where other intelligences are higher up on the pecking order. Crusader Kings II is, perhaps, the best example of this. Also, there may be many leaders, all vying for power. But wherever you're placed in it, strategy games have a power hierarchy. Commands travel downwards from the rulers to the roulette. Resources and map information travel the opposite way. Now I will be the first to admit that strategy games have not done much with this aspect of strategy. Most games abstract away this downward-facing level of strategy and assume 100% efficiency in transmitting and performing orders. For example, in Age of Empires, players can easily, with medieval units, launch simultaneous offensives over massive distances into enemy territory with an efficiency that rivals Operation Barbarossa. But there are games that try and incorporate this concept into their mechanisms, either through the Clausewitzian idea of friction, the disparity between ideal performance and actual performance, or through differentiation of subordinates through abilities or traits. Either way, this idea of delegation and command remains important in all strategy games, and is what distinguishes them from games that emphasize self-development, for example, role-playing games or first-person shooters. Now that everything has been said and done, have we managed to solve the initial dilemma? What makes Call of Duty not a strategy game? And conversely, what makes Age of Empires a strategy game? Let us review what has been said so far. 1. Definitions describing the external features of strategy games cannot eliminate intuitively non-strategy games, and risk being too prescriptive. 2. The core of strategy, and by extension strategy games, encompasses the following three aspects. A. The application of means to achieve ends. For strategy games, this means an emphasis on process in gaming. B. The involvement of another intelligence to ensure that the player cannot predict actions based on naturalistic or physical laws. C. The existence, implied or otherwise, of a system of command and delegation, and the clear establishment of a hierarchy of power. So, reviewing all this, can we exclude COD from the group of strategy games? I believe we can. Now, COD does rely on process and utilization of game mechanisms in order to achieve player ends. What gun to use, when to use it, and so on. To an extent, this process in COD is much more reflexive than in strategy games. But just as we can't deny the existence of cool-headed planning in COD, we can't deny that sometimes strategy gamers are susceptible to impulse, especially in the RTSs. Moving on, COD does have AI and multiplayer to keep players on their toes, and to lower predictability. However, the system of command and delegation in COD is quite absent in comparison to what we would consider strategy games. In COD, it's possible for your actions alone to be the primary cause of success during gameplay. This isn't really the case in strategy games. Even if your intellect alone brought about victory, it is still implied that this win also rests on the efficient and abstracted work of your underlings. Your plan is not only for you, it is for everybody under your control. This is the power hierarchy at work, and it is not what COD aspires to. As such, COD is not a strategy game. Note that I'm not denying that at certain times, COD cannot possess strategic airs. In fact, you could argue that a multiplayer COD match probably involves more strategic thinking than an average player versus computer strategy game. Nor do I affirm that, from now on, we can clearly see what is a strategy game and what isn't. After all, according to these definitions, is Final Fantasy XIII a strategy game? But now, having sketched out what it means at heart to be a strategy game, we have created a base of sorts to explore this genre further.